Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I start with this slide. It's a comparison between living matter and dead matter. So we are very used to think about loads as a way to change the shape of a solid. An engineer thinks about loading. In the contrary, for living matter, most of the change of shape are due to growth. And growth is very important. And so we want to push forward this idea to change the shape of a solid, thinking about the growth. And growth is a very general word, and different contexts use different words. For an engineer, growth is simply a pre-strain. And the pre-strain can be very large. And here is an example of using pre-strains or also distortion to change the shape of a solid. On the left, you see the huge displacement of a solid, and the right, you see the cause of this huge displacement is a growth, a distortion, which is different along the thickness. So at the bottom, volume elements become larger, and at the top, they become smaller. And because of that, you can change the shape. And it is quite easy to change the shape of a solid using this technique. So now, what is the mechanical meaning of the distortion? So distortion, growth, pre-strain are different words for the same mechanical motion. And the idea is that to add other degrees of freedom to our solid. So instead of describing only the position of a point, we also describe the shape of a volume element. And we also say that this new shape, the distorted shape of the volume element, is a ground-free, is a stress-free shape. So it's the natural shape or the ground shape of the volume elements. So we are thinking only about volume elements. So the problem now is to put together all these distorted volume elements. What is the mathematical representation of a distortion? You can represent a distortion with a tensor field, and for a 3D solid you can represent the tensor field with a 3x3 matrix. So, and here you have the 9 more degrees of freedom, the 9 entries of this matrix, and it's quite easy. Now, in this example, you see on the left you see the matrix. And on the right, you see the deformation that you can achieve with this distortion. This deformation is very large, and it would be very, very difficult to get the same deformation applying loads, because you have to use live loads, and the loads must change during the deformation. So it's very difficult. Using this approach, it is very easy. It is also easy from the computational point of view. And you can get many different shaping. Here you see another very interesting shaping. What you see is a sequence of configuration. Each configuration is corresponding to a given distortion. And what is more important is that this distortion is compatible. It means that all these shapes are stress-free. So there is no stress in this solid. And this is the goal of the growth of a living tissue. Growth must not induce stress in the tissue. You want only to change the shape, but not to change the elastic energy. You don't want to stress the solid. Here is another example. You can design a morphing with distortion. So here is we design the formation of a tube, and you will see how this flat bar will round up on a cylinder, and eventually you get something that very similar to a tube. Again, it's very easy to get this change of shape. Now you can use this technique also for shells, and here is our contribution. And a shell is a very special three-dimensional solid. So a shell essentially is a surface with an extrusion along the normal. And so you can use this notion of distortion, three-dimensional distortion, also for a shell-like body. And here you see how you can decompose the distortion field. And behind this decomposition, you can recognize the fundamental forms of a surface. So the idea is that to morph a solid, you need to assign a distortion, which is equivalent to a target metric. Instead, if you want to morph a shell, you have to assign the fundamental forms of a surface. And these two fundamental forms, the first one is related to the membranal strain. The second one is related to the bending, the curvature of the middle surface. You can play with these new degrees of freedom, and for you, these fundamental forms are targets. So what you want to do is to morph a shell such that the fundamental forms of the shell are as close as possible to these two targets, the first and the second fundamental forms. And here is an example, very similar to the previous one. Now I am morphing a shell. So this is a shell. The same kind of morphing that you have seen for a 3D solids, now you will see it for a shell. And again, the kind of deformation is very large, it's huge, and it's very easy to solve this problem. This is a fully non-linear elastic problem. So it would be very difficult to solve this problem with loadings instead of using distortion or target metrics. And for example, we can curl a shell like this. And again, there is a reference shape and you want a target shape. So you solve a sequence of elastic problem. And each shape that you see is the solution of an elastic problem with a given target fundamental forms. And we can use this technique also, it's my last example, to probe the change of shape from a shell and to use this measurement to deform another shell. So here you see two different shells. One is flat, the other one is curved, and those two are reference shape. And now the black one, I will grow some bubble, and then I want to replicate that bubble on the other shell. And so we can measure the change of curvature on the black shell and use this information as a target metric for the purple shell. And you will see this bubble growing on the shell. And what is interesting is that on the black, on the source shape, this deformation is given and is compatible. So there's you simply have a bubble on a flat surface. Instead, on the other shell is not compatible, and you will see here a buckling around the bubble. And this is my last slide. The final slide is just references, and I thank you for the attention.
Well, thank you so much, Luciano. Very interesting approach, very interesting method. We have a question from Professor Luciano Rosati. Please, Professor.
Il microfono, professore.
Hi, Luciano. I mean,
Hi.
Congratulations for your very interesting presentation.
Thank you very much.
And just a question. I mean, were you motivated by an intellectual curiosity, or did you think? Are you thinking about some specific applications? for instance, how do you apply that kind of distortions, very nice and very interesting distortion, by actuating the structure in some way, or what else?
Okay. First of all, this work has been done with other people, and I want to thank Stefano, is one among the authors, also Valerio, Varano, and Gloria Rido Argento. So it's a group of people, because it's not so easy to solve this problem. And it's not me, but we are a group. And the motivation, initially the motivation was to transport the metric. So we started from the last slide. And the idea was to reproduce shape changes on different surfaces. So for example, with the camera, I take the evolution, with a movie, deformation from suits. Then I want to apply that kind of deformation to another different surfaces. So this was our original idea. And then we discovered that with this tool, we can morph very easily a lot of shells, but also solids. So now we are thinking about using this technique also for form finding.
And could you be so kind to send me the list of references you showed in your last slide?
Oh, yes, sure.
I'll send my email on the private.
Okay, yes.
Privately.
Thank you for your interest.
Can I add a comment?
Yes, of course, Stefano.
Thank you. Because if you go, Luciano, to the slide in which we have the expression of the fundamental forms of the metric.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this way we found a way of we are able to calculate the target metric. The idea for finding, for instance, is to try to see when some terms here disappear, and so which kind of also mechanical property could have the obtained surface. And if it is possible to also to obtain according to boundary conditions also that could be taken into account, of course. So of course, this is a work in progress.
Okay. Okay, thank you.